Welcome to the bold analysis. The African Union Commission chairperson position is decided through intense lobbying, diplomacy, and influence peddling. That is why the Mjadala, the African leadership debate that just concluded in Addis Ababa, is integral part of Raila Odinga's campaign. And in this podcast, before we have a breakdown on this contest, or rather this debate, I want to ask you to take a minute, and if you followed that debate, what do you think of Raila Odinga's, specifically two candidates, Raila Odinga and the Djibouti candidate campaigns, performance in that debate? Do you think Raila, Muhammad Ali Yusuf, or rather, between Muhammad Ali Yusuf, Mahamoud Ali Yusuf, and Raila Odinga, who do you think performed best? I know I'm seeing that debate in social media. Of course, different Kenyans, some, the emotional battalion, are passing a verdict that Raila has flopped. Some people are also saying it's fair, and some are also saying it's excellent. I want you to take a minute and tell me, what do you think of Raila Odinga's performance? Because at the end of this podcast, I'm going to demonstrate to you why that debate should be, that Raila Odinga should, and Kenya should draw very serious lessons from that debate. Before we even look at the contents and the performance of the two, there were three, but I've narrowed to the two, and I'll tell you why. I made some few observations. Number one, the questions for the 4 rounds were sealed and only revealed during each round. 4 questions. I like the format. In this country, when we are having a presidential debate, we are going to bombard the candidates with 1,000,000 questions. And I like the fact that in that AUC race, Africa is facing many challenges. There are coup d'etat, there are wars, there are, there's several other factors. There are elections, people that win elections and cling in power. There are so many other several factors in Africa, but they decided to only address 4. I think it's a good lesson for people that plan presidential debates in this country and even this continent, that it's a bit cool just to narrow down to few questions. The other one is strictness in time management, commendable. It is 4 minutes. In Kenya here, William Ruto will speak 6 minutes, 8 minutes, na alipewa dakika 2. And we'll keep on arguing with the moderators. And I like a bit of that. The Djibouti candidate, Mahamoud Ali Yusuf, decided to respond both in English and French. I did an analysis earlier in the day, and I said that Muhammad Ali Yusuf is going to that debate with strength of language. And I think, yes, Raila understands German, but of course German is not one of the languages in the continent. I realized, and I'm glad that no one tried to compete with him in terms of the language, not even the Madagascar candidate, who also understands French and speaks French. So, on that end, I think planning, execution of that right on time, and everything that has been executed. I think I say heko to the communication team behind Raila. The work done by the Pauline Njoroge is very commendable. According to me, they did a good job to package and, of course, just psyching up Raila Odinga. 4 questions. Out of these 4 questions, I was keen on the first one on the debt management and the resources in the continent, where Raila talked about debt restructure and fairness, debt justice, so that Africa can get cheap debts. And I think out of the 4 candidates, he got the best response for it. That is, and the time he was saying, we are a resourceful continent with depleted resources. So the first question, he performed fairly better compared to the other questions. And I did not pay. Now, I want us to pay attention to the 3 questions. The next 3 questions. And this was the second question on silencing of guns within the continent and a pushing for permanent seat in the United Nations United Nations Security Council. How to silence guns? I think on this one, Raila being a seasoned politician that have been, of course, on some peacekeeping missions, and he tried to borrow more on what's happening in Kenya. And if you allow me, this one Raila not got wrong, but this one the Djibouti candidate edged him out. The response on what he says on the issues of dialogue, to me, I feel the African problem in terms of silencing guns is more complex. And the issue of dialogue is a bit simplistic to address it, if you ask me. Even though he did address the causing factors that needs to be handled. But if you compare the response by both Raila and the Mahamoud, I think the Djibouti candidate aided him. We need to address key contributing factors like poverty, external influence, and religion, and enhance dialogue. A bit concrete, but I want you to listen to what the Djibouti candidate. The Djiboutian candidate argues that the primary reason African conflicts remain unsolved is the lack of political will, with the Madagascar guy, of course, throwing a jab that AU allowing Turkey to mediate the conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia, questioning why the organization couldn't manage it on its own. But I want to listen to what Raila's response on the silencing guns between what Raila and Mahamoud said.
Of these conflicts, there are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that all African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have.
Now, I feel that on this one, as much as Raila tried to create a big picture on it, but the question of dialogue, he goofed. I think it was a bit of local lifting. The third question is declining Pan-Africanism. How can we promote Pan-Africanism and reduce foreign influence or foreign influence peddling? I found on this, if you look at the response from the Djibouti candidate and Raila was more concrete. He had a solid answer and he edged out the Djibouti candidate, who was his main challenger in that debate. The Madagascar guy is, to me, was a non-starter. If you check around for him, he was a non-starter. That debate was between Raila and the Djibouti candidate. Then he talked about military strength, global south must stand out, integration is a must. But Raila's speech on intra-Africa trade should be developed. I think he had a more concrete answer to the question of awakening Pan-Africanism. And of course, this one was more interesting because when I did analysis earlier in the day, I said that Raila's strong point is on Pan-Africanism.
Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there was cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor, secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation.
In the whole debate and all discussion about this context, he said intra-Africa trade, speaking about what's working in the rest of the continent, and he speaks about the jobs and how to empower the youth and how that would actually help. Because, and it's very ironical that while in Addis Ababa is talking about this, they brought the sibling back here, is telling the country about why they need to export jobs. So Raila got the question of Pan-Africanism. Silencing the guns went to Djibouti. Then what new approaches will you introduce to reinvent, that was the last question, the fourth one, to reinvigorate and implementation of reforms, streamlines AU's agenda and strengthen its long-term effectiveness? This one was a question that needed continuity. It needed a man who understands what exactly is being done, and so that you build from what's going on. And this is why the Djibouti candidate, in this one, he didn't find, no one had an answer to this except him.
Reforms in 2017. And then the champion for those reforms was His Excellency President Kagame, and he passed the responsibility to President Ruto. Now, there are a number of reforms that have already been implemented. We have to recognize that. The size of the commission, we had 10 commissioners, chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 8 commissioners, and it has been reduced. We have what we call a golden rule in terms of managing the staff and the personnel. I'm still waiting for the SACA program to be implemented. I hope that this hot potato will not wait for us, one of us, when we'll be elected. But I hope that the SACA process will be implemented. It is about the personnel, the staff. We have moved from a lot of short contract employees to a permanent contract. That's very important. If you want to create loyalty, you want to create the ownership within your staff and personnel, you have to make them happy. They need to have a permanent contract, and it is in the SACA program. Now, the biggest bottleneck of the reforms is the financing. Our heads of state said we will pay 0.2% of eligible import to the Commission. Only 17 countries, 17, are applying and abiding by that rule. It has to change. I'm not going to impose that on our leaders. It's not my intention, but I will advocate for it. It's very important to have, that particular issue of mobilizing and fostering financing be resolved immediately. Then our experts, there is a unit in the African Union Commission called the Reform Unit, led by Mr. Makoko, a very able African expert. But there are so many reforms that have not been implemented. One of them is PAP, the Pan-African Parliament. It's still a consultative organ. When is the Pan-African Parliament will become a legislative organ? They have passed in 2014 a protocol. Only 15 countries ratified that protocol. And this is one of the major reforms that we have to implement. Then we have on the judicial sector, the Court of Justice, the Commission of Human Rights. Sometimes they are fighting on issues. The Court of Justice do not open its doors to nationals, to African citizens, to NGOs. They are complaining. I am hearing complaints about the African citizens with regard to the Court of Justice. And then they are fighting who is doing what, the Commission of Human Rights. These reforms have to be implemented. And the Bureau of Liaison, a liaison bureau. We have so many on the continent. That's double use of those bureaus. Time is running, time is flying. So we have to rationalize. How can you imagine that you have 3 bureaus in the same region? And we're saying we should have the golden rules for management. And whenever we want to touch one of the bureaus, it's a political matter. It's useless, but it's a political matter. The country that is hosting the bureau is saying you won't touch it. It has to change. It needs leadership. It needs understanding, negotiation, but it has to change. If you want to change things, we have to be frank and outspoken. We have to be, really tough when it comes to be tough, and lean when it comes to we have to do it. We have to do it.
No one had an answer to this question. It was the most technical. It looks easy, but most technical, because this was actually measuring the competence, the technical competence of the candidate, understanding of the African Union Commission, of the other structure and system, and above all, Djibouti guy took it. No any other person in that debate had an answer to this question except him. Now, this is showing this. If you ask me, the race is between Raila and the Djibouti candidate. On this debate, I would give Raila 60% and give the Djibouti guy 40%. I know that's a bit shocking, yes, but that is it. It was not so bad. Even on the areas it didn't perform. But, I saw Emotional Battalion in social media running it. But we said here that when we have we have our problems with Raila in this country. Yes, it's true. Alienda, wakati the youth. But he's a man. And when he throws himself, when the lion is out there, yeah, it's only fair that we support him. Yes, it's only fair that we support him. So I saw those tweets, we endorse the Djibouti candidate, do this. No. Hapana. I think that was unnecessary. Anyway, the social media posts that people are making, the tweets, those are not going to change. Those are not going to decide how the African president is going to vote. But I think how the debate has shaped the race is very interesting. What that debate has achieved, it has told the continent the race is between Raila and Mahamoud Ali Yusuf. It's a 2-horse race. And it's a tight one. The candidate that Raila is facing is very strong, too strong, and very competent. Nairobi team must upscale their influence peddling to boost Raila Odinga. The campaigns they've done, they must do it double times, because that candidate is very organized. From Thursday evening when he arrived in Addis Ababa, they organized a welcoming dinner, and envoys, they were very strategic, and several envoys attended. You can see the way he's using the language as a strong point, the African languages as a strong point, and is well packaged and polished. So it is not something that you can take lightly. We really need to agree. Nairobi team have a lot of work to do. There is are two candidates there. Raila breathes fresh energy. The Djibouti candidate, Mohamed Ali Yusuf, breathes fresh energy but with an element of continuity. Sometimes within the systems is sometimes very rigid to changes. So I think as Raila tries to tailor-make his campaign or his message, he should also not be seen to be too rigid. That he doesn't want is someone who's just coming to make an overhaul change. Sometimes system is normally immune to changes. So there should be an element of continuity. The Djibouti candidate is talking like already things that are happening. He's pointing out this is what AU is doing, this is what is happening, but this is what can be done better. So I think even Raila's team should look at how they embrace continuity. Raila approach on his 10-point agenda, which they said initially they were going to pitch, from that debate, the thematic areas that the debate has touched can just tell the candidates that probably moving forward, they can labor, they can narrow down to those 4 points, even as they cover the other areas. But those 4 areas that have been raised, the questions on Pan-Africanism, the questions on reforms, on silencing the guns in the continent, debt restructure and resources, those 4 areas are critical to the continent. And I think even as you tailor-made 9-point agenda, you really need to focus on those 4 areas. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That is my take.